Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. This one is going to be my thoughts on the Awakening of Roku preview pages and also the description that came out last night. I did a live stream last night. It was a bit impromptu. I found out about it, just set up the live stream, basically got on straight away. I read through all the chapters that we got, apart from the epilogue, the kind of spoilery epilogue that's up on Amazon, just because why would I read the first 7 chapters and then skip straight to the epilogue? Obviously. That live stream is up. The video on demand of it is up there if you would like to check it out, especially because it was my first time going through those chapters. So if you want to just experience the chapters through me reading it out directly, giving a little bit of kind of commentary as we kind of go through, definitely check it out there, especially if the preview looks a little bit different in your region compared to what I have. You might just want to check out that video just to read the pages, because on the Google Books preview, I got the first 7 chapters and the first page of chapter 8. But I know some people were saying they didn't get some of the ones in the middle and stuff like that. So just be aware that I do have that other video out there on the channel. It'll be linked below if you want to check it out. This video is going to be more of an overview, kind of talking generally, broadly about, hey, you don't have to watch the live stream. Let's just cover this in this video. What's Awakening of Roku actually about? Because outside of like a 1-sentence description, we haven't really had much to go on. And now suddenly we've gone from 0 to basically we're waiting for the book to come out now, pretty much. We've got all the preview that we kind of need. So let's get everyone up to speed on that ahead of the release on December 30th. So on Amazon, we have the description, and then I'm going to switch over to Google Books for most of the preview, though I'm not going to read through kind of most of it, obviously. So here is the description, and you'll notice straight away there is a mistake here. It's a pretty bad mistake that I hope is somehow fixed before print, but because this is clearly a preview page from the hardcover version, I think they might not have caught it, but we'll see. There are as many paths to full avatarhood as there are avatars. 3 years after the mess on Lombok Island, Roku has finally mastered airbending and is on track to become the avatar the world needs. But when he encounters a mysterious illness on his way to Agna, he delays his journey and the next phase of his training to prevent the situation from worsening. As Roku ventures deeper into the north and nearer to danger, he soon realizes there's more to the malady than meets the eye. With the assistance of his good friend Gyatso, a gifted waterbender named Makitok, and others near and far, including from his past, Roku races to contain the crisis before the disease can ravage the north and beyond. This suspenseful follow-up to the Reckoning of Roku delves into the Avatar's continued efforts to trust himself and restore peace to a world hovering on the brink of catastrophe. You'll note I skipped this entire paragraph because this is clearly a mistake. This exact paragraph, word for word, is part of the description on the front cover, on the front kind of inner flap of Reckoning of Roku. This is not relevant really to Awakening of Roku, and I'm not sure if this was just meant to be deleted when they put this together or if this was meant to be replaced by another paragraph. So I'm a bit unclear about what the takeaway here is. You're not meant to regard it here, but like, are we missing a portion of the description, or is it actually like I did there, just worsening as Roku ventures deeper into the north? Not really sure. But still, some cool stuff there. We already knew about the whole mysterious illness, that it's going to be kind of set in or around Agna, the Northern Water Tribe, because Roku, 3 years later, is finished his airbending training and is now moving up to the north to start waterbending, and encounters this kind of issue along the way. Sort of similar to the setup from the first book, where he starts his airbending training, and before he can like properly get going, he encounters his first mission as the Avatar, and here's kind of that sort of happening again, but he is a more experienced Avatar. But in a way, how does he respond given the kind of mistakes of that first incident? That's kind of part of what we're going to go into here. Of course, the mysterious illness, we find out that there is more to it than meets the eye, and we will cover a little bit of that in some of the context we now have from the preview pages. It's a really interesting plot, certainly, with the villain as well. And then, of course, who's the team avatar for this mission? It's going to be Roku, going to be Gyatso, of course, but also Makituk joins them. Now, you might be wondering, who is Makituk? If you've not read the RPG material, you will not know who this character is, but if you have, you do know at least a little bit about this character. This character was first introduced from the core book of the RPG. In the Roku era section, in the Water Tribe section, there is this character, Makituk, introduced. A spirit bender and one of the only real trans characters in the franchise. The book just sort of details the idea that she kind of lives a little bit out in the kind of wilderness, like on her own, kind of a little bit separate from everyone. She kind of gets on well with spirits. She is a spirit bender. She's like a pre-Unalaq spirit bender. So she's a quite spiritual character. They describe a little bit of her kind of backstory about how she wasn't fully accepted because she's kind of trans, and I'm guessing this book is going to delve into that a little bit more because, of course, she's going to be younger here because there's a bit of a time skip, of course, between even where we are here, 3 years on from the first book, to get to where the Roku era RPG stuff is. So Makituk is also going to be positioned effectively in the Malaya position from the first book, and Malaya was a kind of standout, kind of breakout character from the first book. So I'm really eager to see how Makituk is done in this one. Of course, gifted waterbender, and we do get to see that over the course of these preview pages in terms of like, yeah, some nice combat waterbending introduced here, healing, and then we'll see, like, has she fully developed spirit bending yet, or is that something that we might see actually happen here in this book? Really interesting idea, and it's cool just to have that reference of like, I know who this character is before I've read the book that is like the main introduction of the character. Always cool to get that. And then, yeah, contain the crisis before it can ravage the north and beyond, because the villain's plan seems to be kind of primarily to attack Agna Kel-A, but also attack the world. Now, we'll get into potentially what the motivations are kind of shortly, but it's certainly intriguing. And I think I would just, that's what I would say coming out of this, is I am very intrigued by what we have from these first 7 and a bit chapters. There are so many different point of views we get to just across this group of chapters. There, of course, is Roku, but there's also a Ta Min plot where we get scenes from chapters from her point of view. The villain's name is Atka, and we seem to at least be getting some chapters from her point of view. But there are also Sozin chapters as well. Meaning we're kind of getting a little bit of everything. Roku's journey in the north. We're going to Ta Min, who of course is positioned in the court of Omashu, which is interesting. With Sozin, we're going, of course, into the Fire Nation royal family and some of the politics there. His father, Taiso, is much more heavily involved in this book, it seems like, maybe than the others, as we begin to maybe set up how exactly does Sozin's, the succession to Sozin come about and stuff like that. Zaysan looks like she's going to be maybe a little bit more involved in the book. I don't expect maybe a ton of her, but at least they're going to acknowledge her in certain scenes, as is kind of required, of course. And then, yeah, the villain, I don't know how many chapters we're going to get with the villain, but it looks like it's going to be maybe somewhat equivalent to previous novels, where there'll be at least 2, 3, maybe 4 chapters across the book, and plus we'll meet that character from like the hero's perspective as well, and that should be enough to get the character across reasonably well. The other aspect that I think comes across quite nicely here is that, unlike the first book where it was kind of quite introductory and we got like some world building on, say, like the Fire Nation situation, because like Roku as a Fire Nation noble was able to present a certain kind of view of things, and we did get some insight into the kind of royal family through the Sozin dynamic, of course. A lot of the first book was very adventure focused. We were going to, Wan Shi Tong's library, the Sandbenders. We were going to Lombok Island, which is more reminiscent of an era long past. We didn't really delve into what the description almost kind of presents, because this is from the first book, this mistake here, the idea of like, oh, it's about politics between like land disputes between the Earth King and the Fire Nation. Yeah, that was like the subtext in a way to some of it, but we didn't dive into it too much. Whereas this book looks like it's actually going to cover that a little bit more, in that like there is a chapter where we have Roku speaking to Fire Lord Taiso, and Taiso asking him to intervene on behalf of the Fire Nation, but Roku deciding that, no, I'm going to prioritize my training over, I think, something that you and your advisors should be able to deal with. I don't think the Avatar should be involved in this negotiation. And Roku just trying to find the right balance between not diving headlong into every conflict like in the first book, but also not like almost maybe running away from every conflict like because he's doubting himself like he is in this book. When and where should he get involved is kind of the question that he has to deal with here. There are some very interesting moments with Gyatso as well in this book, though I suppose we'll get more as we go on. It's clear that the death of Malaya has deeply affected him, and he is still quite down about that, given that, again, 3 years have passed. So it's really interesting because there is still connection to the first book, but they've obviously made a bit of a decision to also go in a slightly different way. So it's an interesting continuation where like they're going like 3 years later, we're actually doing the like, oh, Tommen is doing stuff in Omashu like we maybe expected them to. So I actually kind of like that approach of like, I'm wondering if they maybe considered at one point early in the writing process having it be more of a like 6 months later type thing, and they realized that we actually need to create a bit more separation. We want a bit of a different feel. Let's move on to the next stage of Roku's journey, and it will create some new dynamics. And I'm kind of all for that, and I think it looks like it's going to be a pretty nice decision overall. So I'm not going to go crazy into detail kind of as we kind of skim through the preview here. So on Amazon, of course, you can kind of skim through the actual pages that represent like this is the hardcover preview, but it stops after I think the first 3. But you can see here we get the prologue, and then at least as we switch over to Google Books, all the way through the first 7 chapters, and then a little bit of the 8th as well. So yeah, let's kind of jump in here. So the prologue is quite interesting in that it's not from Roku or any of the characters that we know perspectives. This is effectively the introduction of the illness, the mysterious illness, where it sort of stems from to a certain degree, and also the introduction of the villain. So I'll actually skip straight to the end just so you have kind of full context for this. But the idea is that a father and a son are out hunting. They encounter a turtle seal that goes crazy, and an animal that's not known for being super violent suddenly attacks the boy's father and mortally wounds him. And as the son is sort of panicking, this woman approaches, revealing her name is Atka, and she doesn't come to help. She has come to basically witness what the wild animal infected by this disease has done. It finally worked, but not for long enough. So she's been witnessing what this crazed animal did, because they highlight that this is obviously very unlike a turtle seal to just freak out and attack someone and kill someone. But also it was covered in purple kind of splotches all over its body. It was foaming at the mouth, and definitely a sense that it was a bit more powerful. It was stronger than a turtle seal should be. And that seems to be a property of this illness, this poisoning, basically, that happened here. So obviously we're presenting a little bit of a mad scientist kind of character here, who has facilitated some sort of a manufactured disease type thing here, and is experimenting on animals in sort of the northern wilderness. Now specifically where we're set here this is not super near Agna Kel'a. We're in the Northern Water Tribe, but it's one of the settlements before you get to the actual capital. So it's a little bit, it's meant to be sort of a bit of a forgotten kind of part of the north, and that's meant to play into some of the world building that we're doing here, which is that the capital, you almost view it as that is the Northern Water Tribe, but there are settlements in or around it because it's a big location up north. But the deals that the capital, the chief is doing, are not really helping some of these outlying settlements like this area here, because one of the details you get early on is the idea that they're out hunting, and their hunting is being heavily hindered by trading companies restricting them from doing certain things, diseases that have come in just because of all the international trading that's going on. Kind of relatively like normal diseases are kind of coming in, but this is something different here that's presented in the opening. I think it's a really cool atmosphere to present. It has an element of like, it starts off with two people from the water tribe out kind of hunting, has a little bit of an early ATLA feel from right at the beginning. But of course, instead of finding the avatar, they find a wild animal and a disease, and the villain is introduced here. It's a really kind of fun opening, I think, as a reader, just to see this. I think it's really nicely done. Then the first chapter here proper is kind of just the reintroduction of Roku. Where is he at now that he's finishing his airbending training? He's a master. Gyatso is a master. Gyatso has his arrow tattoos, and he's about to say goodbye to the Southern Air Temple because he's moving to Agna to do his waterbending training. And he actually has loved his time at the Southern Air Temple. Massive contrast to the early days of Reckoning of Roku. He really liked his time here in the end and doesn't want to leave, doesn't want to miss having Sister Disha around as much as he has had these last few years. So we kind of just get the kind of reintroduction of Gyatso. We get some final words of wisdom from Disha here before he leaves, kind of just presenting him the idea that like the world leaders out there are going to try and sort of like use you, take advantage of you. They will tell you you will do the right thing as the Avatar by helping us, but they're just out for themselves. You have to kind of navigate this effectively as the Avatar yourself. You have to trust yourself. You have to look inwards and trust yourself. But that, of course, is where Roku struggles. We do bring up the incident on Lombok Island and the idea of he has reflected on it and feels like he made the wrong choice because it ultimately resulted in him having to kill someone in Ulo, but also Malaya lost her life as well. And he kind of blames himself for that because there's still a lot of murkiness around how much does Gyatso know about what happened, who blames who for what, how suspicious is everyone of Sozin. It feels like that's going to come to the surface at some point because one of the few points of like maybe tension between Roku and Gyatso is just whenever Sozin comes up, because it's Roku's best friend effectively, borderline a brother, and that's a contrast with his kind of new best friend Gyatso, who doesn't have a very high opinion of Sozin based on how he's interacted with him. And that's clearly something that is going to come to a head, because the Gyatso setup in this book is that he apparently is being sent to Haribulkan, the capital of the Fire Nation, to be one of the air nomads helping to facilitate the opening of the Fire and Air Center for Learning, which Roku made the deal with Sozin to make happen at the end of the first book. So that's why they're kind of leaving together. There's a kind of message from Ta Min sent to Roku. We see that they're getting on really well. Lots of messages back and forth. You can tell that, like, okay, there's a romance clearly forming here. And it's going to be exciting to see them hopefully meet at some point in the book again. But also we start to tease some of the idea of Omashu court politics. What is Sozin having her do there? And the fact that she doesn't like some of the things that are going on here. She wants to discuss something in particular with Roku in person. So Gyatso teases him about this. Ooh, meet in person, la la la. As they kind of head out. The next chapter is from Ta Min's perspective. And again, this dives into these Omashu court politics and how this is how you navigate the parties, and that you'd think if you stay calm as things get kind of late and people start kind of like drinking too much and stuff like that, you might get the juicy gossip. But it's revealed that actually, no. Most of these people know what they're doing. They're going to have a good time and not let the stuff slip. They're sloppy but not careless. So you leave the party early because you're not going to get the information you're looking for. Instead, she has to do more spy work. And we do set up the idea that she's done training. She's improved her firebending. She's learned how to like climb walls effectively and be a bit of a spy. And she is a little bit concerned about the path that she's going on here. She wants to be a diplomat. She wants to be an emissary for the Fire Nation. But she thinks that maybe some of the way Sozin is having her do things is going a little far. She doesn't feel right with the way she does it. I think she gets that there's always going to be a little bit of, I need to do what I need to do to get the information, to get the best deal for my nation. But still, he's asking her to maybe go a little bit too far. She is just a spy, really, instead of a diplomat here. She doesn't like that, and she needs to speak to Roku about this. This is when Dalasai is reintroduced into the story here. So, of course, this was Dalasai and Kozaru were on Sozin's team in the first book. Dalasai was the more kind of sciencey focused one of the two, coming more into play more towards the end, and she's here obviously working with Sozin as well, and she basically passes on the next message from Sozin, which is that she wants Ta Min to get information on the upcoming big meeting, which is between Omashu's Minister for Peace and Ba Sing Se's Minister for Peace. So what's going on here? Of course, the two big places in the Earth Kingdom, Omashu, Ba Sing Se, Queen Guozun of Omashu, Earth King Jailun of Ba Sing Se. They're very independent. We know from the RPG that they don't like each other. They have very different approaches. Yeah, this is a big deal. Sozin wants to know what this is about, so Ta Min needs to get involved here. Dalasai doesn't care that this might be a tough task. Just get in there. Very, very interesting, because it obviously speaks to, that means Ta Min is probably going to have to jump into action and I guess to a certain degree do a little bit of a Yang Chen on it. This is not going to work through normal diplomatic means. She's going to have to sneak in, I guess, somehow, which is going to be fun. But where's the limit for her, I suppose, is sort of the idea. Next, we move into them arriving kind of basically back at the Fire Nation here. Some cool world building details. How many islands make up the Fire Nation? Over 5,000. Now immediately they clarify across this paragraph here that a lot of them are just kind of rocky outcroppings and they're not fully islands you can do stuff on necessarily. But still, even if you take out most of them, it still leaves a couple of hundred islands where you can actually like maybe do stuff on, which is crazy to think about. I was expecting the number to be maybe 50 or something, but it's really, really interesting. But anyway, there's some really interesting dynamic here. Thinking of Malaya, Gyatso, of course, has reflected on this for years now at this point. He still hasn't got over it because his overall thoughts on it after all this meditation is, I've come to accept I'm destined to lose everyone I love. And again, remember, he had that weird vision in the first book, in a way, about the almost like the moment of his death to a certain degree. And then it's interesting because like Roku says, you haven't lost me, not yet. And there is that kind of sense that like we know as the audience that like he will lose Roku. Now, it's interesting because it's so long from here, from this exact moment. It's so many years later that you think about like, oh yeah, what does Gyatso at that point in time think about? Like, how does he hear about the death of Roku? That's very, very interesting because of course this would be at a point where like they don't know the exact detail of who the next avatar is just yet. When does he find out? What's his reaction to that? Given that, again, he's suspicious of Sozin. Does he immediately know? Is he maybe told by Sozin? That would be very interesting. It's just one of those ones where, like, because we know kind of what happens next, that line has a lot of impact, which is, I think, is very, very cool. But yeah, they arrive, they're in Harry Vulcan, they're here at the Fire Nation capital. It should be exciting, but they're like, yay, Fire Nation capital. Not really. Neither of them are happy about kind of coming here. Roku, of course, as we know, was kind of, didn't really have too much keeping him here. The main thing that he felt like he would be missing out on by leaving the Fire Nation was his friendship with Sozin. But now, the context for coming back and why Roku's not super excited is because he's been messaging Ta Min back and forth, other people, fine. He has not been able to get in touch with Sozin. Sozin has not been responding to his messages, and he doesn't know what the situation is. Very concerned about that. Did I do something wrong? That sort of dynamic. Super interesting. But effectively, we build to the idea. Gyatso doesn't want to go into the palace. He's decided to stay outside. There's a fun moment where Gyatso introduces Roku as the master of two elements. Initially, it's like, oh, cool, you're announcing me, but then, oh, you're diminishing me, of course. We see that the guards are kind of quite gruff with Roku. He doesn't know what he did wrong. We later find out clearly that Taiso has asked the guards to give him a little bit of a rough introduction here, because it is revealed that this is all being kind of orchestrated by Taiso. We will find out that, he's going to arrive in there, speak to Taiso. Taiso's going to tell Roku that Sozin is not here. But actually, we're going to find out that Sozin is here, but Taiso does not want Sozin and Roku to interact. He's trying to manipulate Roku by being like, hey, we'll deprive him of his friend, and that will allow me to manipulate him in the way I want, so I can facilitate. If you want to talk to my son, give us what we want. You are a fire avatar after all. That's the approach that Taiso is taking with Roku at this point in time, leaning into that kind of political manipulation, using their friendship to his advantage overall. It's a very interesting scene because Roku doesn't embarrass himself here. He knows what to do, but clearly he is a bit taken aback by how Taiso, who he kind of knows pretty well because, again, he has been friends with Sozin for so long, but he's really given a bit of a frosty reception here by the Fire Lord here. It's a super, super interesting scene. I think it's really, really well done. You've recently mastered airbending. Well, actually, Fire Lord Zito was a fully realized avatar by your age. Like, why are you going so slow, basically? And it's funny because obviously the idea is that Roku's path as the avatar is meant to be the kind of normal one, but he's around a bunch of avatars who basically all were prodigies who were kind of discovered early in some way, or just when they were discovered accelerated through their training super quickly. Because I think Karuk was discovered pretty normal, but was incredible in terms of the bending disciplines. Yang Chen was discovered early. That Kyoshi, of course, has her own kind of crazy circumstances that forced her into action in different ways. Yang Chen, of course, as we know, and then the reveal of Zito here. We already knew this because they did say that Zito was discovered early as the avatar because he bent a second element at a somewhat early age. But now we find out that, he did then go through his training rather quickly, being a fully realized avatar by 19, basically. Because, again, in the first book, Roku is 16. This is 3 years later, so he's 19. You can maybe make the case for 20 because there is a little bit of a time skip at the end of the book, but I think they are talking about it as 3 years post-incident, not 3 years post-book. So I think it is 19, which is interesting. But anyway, what Taiso basically wants from him is that there's this Northern Water Tribe conflict in sort of the Northern Passage, basically, harassing merchant ships. We need you to facilitate this deal being done basically effectively in our favor. Roku wants the details of this, and there's maybe a clear sense that trading companies are involved in this somehow. There's more to this than meets the eye. But then we get this interesting reveal of Taiso's mental faculties beginning to fail him, where he just blanks. He just stops for a couple of seconds, and Roku's like, what's going on here? And then he picks up again and it's like, as I was saying, he needs to be reminded about what they were talking about. And it's like, that's interesting. We'll pick up on this again in the next chapter as well. But the idea is Taiso wants Roku to speak to Chief Tigua in Agnakela. So this is the current chief of the Northern Water Tribe, Tigua. Now, in the RPG, we know it to be Chief Skiri. Now, I think the idea is that we will see the transition from Tigua to Skiri in this book in some way or another. We'll see how that exactly comes about. But that's interesting because the book also seems to be kind of leaning towards, are we going to see part of the succession plan come into play for how we go from Taiso into Sozin? Now, I'll bring up the details that we know about this, which is just that from Avatar Extras on Avatar and the Fire Lord, we know that Sozin won't become Fire Lord for another 8 years. Now, this is 8 years after the start of Avatar and the Fire Lord, which is when it's their 16th birthday, meaning Sozin becomes Fire Lord at 24 years old. He's the exact same age as Roku. That means that is basically 5/4 and a bit years on from this book. So we still have a good few years left where Taiso is the Fire Lord. But I think the idea is probably at this point that Taiso is now beginning to prepare for what's next more heavily, because he's beginning to have these lapses more and more at these big meetings, and he can't hide it from anyone really anymore. So that's the situation there. Roku doesn't want to do this. He feels that this is a task for someone like a trade official or a grand advisor. Again, a reference to Zito and the fact that he works so directly as part of the Fire Nation government, but that is not the way Roku wants to do things at all, which is probably for the best given the kind of political landscape of the Roku era. So that is, I think, worth noting. We get the mention of the financial troubles of Roku's family, which his parents in the previous chapter didn't tell him about, but he could tell that they were holding something back. So that's really interesting. So there's a little bit of kind of manipulation kind of going on here, a bit of a threat. How did that happen? Anything to manipulate the Avatar for the Fire Nation's favor is sort of the idea here. And then there's also this line here at the end as Roku goes to leave, note that those who forget where they come from often find they have no place from which they can return. And Roku just leaves because there isn't too much overly connecting him to the Fire Nation, because he basically makes the decision that, like, my parents are unwilling to talk to me. I already don't have a great relationship with them post Yasu's funeral. I'm just going to go. They can sort that out themselves. I'm not going to get involved in this Fire Nation Northern Water Tribe issue because it feels like something that the nation should be able to sort out among themselves. Maybe I'll interfere if it gets more intense, but it seems like relatively mundane. He's just going to go about his training. And there was a bit of a discussion afterwards with Gyatso about this. Gyatso feels like, hey, you're making the very opposite decision than you made in the first book. Like there's a balance to be found between, sure, don't rush out to every conflict like we did on Lombok Island, but also don't ignore all issues because you're in the middle of your training. As in, are you just not going to be the Avatar while you're doing your training? Wait until it's all done before you ever do anything. That's not going to work at the same time either. And it just gets into the idea of how indecisive at times Roku can be, how unsure of himself he is, and that's something he has to develop, of course, which is quite interesting. But anyway, the idea is that they eventually settle on the idea of like, hey, I'm going to go up north, but Gyatso's going to go with him. The idea is like, I'll go with you, and then immediately come back because, hey, the center for learning is still going to happen. A couple of days is not going to change anything. We'll see what happens. But of course, they're going to encounter the big issue, of course. The next chapter, though, is from Sozin's point of view, and we address the Taiso thing that we were just doing. So one, we find out Sozin wasn't away. He was right there, just not permitted to respond to Roku's messages or meet him here in person. With the idea being that keep a man guessing where he stands with you, and he'll do everything he can to gain your regard. Sozin is very frustrated about this situation. He doesn't like being controlled in this way by his father, but it is clear that he is, even though he's developed, I think, more into the Sozin we maybe expect or know, he is not quite the full evil mastermind just yet. He still hasn't fully put all these pieces in place. It doesn't seem like he's ready just yet to be Fire Lord. He is sort of worried to a certain degree about if he was to maybe take up the throne at some point very, very soon. He's not prepared for it. It does seem like his eyes are still more focused on adventures he could potentially have. He would like to spend more time trying to learn those techniques he learned about at Wan Shi Tong's library. But because Taiso is so focused on the politics side of things, he's having to do all this like official busy work that he doesn't really like to do. But Taiso is kind of preparing in a way for the succession in a way, highlighting that like, okay, I'm still going, but like maybe some people are beginning to think I'm on the way out, but the future is bright because of Sozin. But then we begin to set up the idea of, wait, at this meeting, his father has another one of these pauses again, like he did in the scene with Roku. And Sozin has to step in and like end the meeting quite quickly. Now, before this happened, you can see it here. Sozin is found out to basically be not paying attention to the meeting, distracted by everything else except this boring kind of political work. So it's clear that, like, okay, he needs to develop those skills there. He's a good manipulator in other ways, but not on this side of things. It's interesting. We do find out that, yeah, it's not public knowledge that Taiso is having these kind of moments where he goes blank, but a lot of the high-ups do know about it. So the questions are going around as if, like, has this illness been in a way passed on to Sozin or Zaison or something like that? As in, this could become a major problem if it gets out of hand. So the succession is in dispute, you could say, to a certain degree. They have to be careful with how they handle this situation here. So yeah, Sozin ends the meeting. It happened again, Father. There's no real discussion of it here. You're dismissed. He leaves. He feels shame for what's happened to him, his health beginning to fail him. And yeah, Sozin left afraid of what this meant for his father, afraid of what it meant for his future. So the idea being that, like, it seems like Sozin isn't ready yet to become Fire Lord. He doesn't have the ambitions, like, right now that, like, above all else, I need to be in charge straight away. I think there are certain things he wishes father was more ambitious about that he would do. But in general, he doesn't seem like he wants to take up the throne just yet. Now, maybe there's also a concern about, what if I also have what my father has, and I develop that later on? Interestingly, of course, we know he goes on to live a very long life, and as far as we're aware, he was just as intelligent the whole time through, I guess, but we'll see. Lived to over 100. But a concern for, like, look at how Sozin handled the meeting just there. Missing the question, not paying attention. That's not a good look for the next Fire Lord, potentially. So what do we do from here is sort of the idea. But yeah, then we get the kind of arrival at the Northern Water Tribe. It's not the capital. They temporarily stop off at the southwestern edge of the Northern Water Tribe territory. So they're approaching Agnikela, but they're not yet. Note, this is the settlement from the prologue. It's sort of those same characters kind of being involved here. That moment is going to be referenced, but just note that those characters are kind of from here. We find out that this is sort of near a place called Karuk's Point, which is the southwesternmost coastal settlement on the Northern Water Tribe maps, but this isn't that specific area. That's like the nearest sort of bigger settlement of the Northern Water Tribe. That's not quite the capital. But the idea here is that this settlement is made up of mostly like a lot of older people. It seems to be a village that is on the verge of maybe dying out. They're kind of very traditional. They don't want to move to, like, the bigger location like Karuk's Point. So the idea is that, if the illness continues to take root here and nothing changes, this whole village might be gone in a couple of years. That's sort of the idea here, because a lot of the waterbenders are being kind of bought up effectively by the capital. And there is a discussion as you go through this whole sequence here about, like, there is a lot of frustration from these kind of outlying sections of the Northern Water Tribe with the capital. And that is sort of, in a way, I guess, the point of the villain, who Atka, who again I guess is living here or has come here to just test out whatever she's doing. Either way, there is just a sense of heavy criticism of the Northern Chief and the capital as well. When they bring up Agnikela, it's like, of course the capital, of course you'd mention that. So yeah, they share their food a bit here. There's still that Water Tribe sense of community that's kind of going on here, but they find out that things aren't going so well here. There is the first tease of Magituk as someone who's kind of by themselves in the kind of corner of the room, but she's not properly introduced until a little bit later on. And they get introduced to the concept of there's a bunch of illnesses because of the trading stuff that's kind of going on. But then there also is the more unique illness, and they directly mention the kind of events of the prologue and the animals becoming kind of empowered before dying and stuff like that. And they talk about it here. All really interesting stuff. There's a bit of kind of questioning of Roku and like what exactly it is that he kind of wants to do. Is this a place where he maybe should stay and try to kind of fix something or not? That's the kind of whole idea. And again, Gyatso sort of brings up the idea once again of, you know, should you intervene here or not? When are you going to intervene as the Avatar? You know, can you wait until you complete your training if all these things are going to happen? And there's just that discussion of like, what is the correct approach? Sister Disha gave an advice earlier on in the book, but what is the correct way to approach that? Look inwards, but do I trust myself when I do look inwards? That's the whole idea. There is an Atka scene here, which is very interesting because she's preparing. She's standing over Gyatso and Roku, and she's preparing to give the poison to Roku. And with the idea being that this will be this ultimate test of the poison, apparently because of how powerful the Avatar is. She stops when she realizes, wait, the Avatar state. What if this triggers the Avatar state? I will be killed immediately. This is not the best approach. Instead, what I will do is I will test the poison in a way against the Avatar, not on the Avatar. So the idea is that she's going to poison other things and see how the Avatar goes about dealing with it. As if the poison people or whatever animals can cause as much chaos that not even the Avatar can stop it, then her plan is going to go off without a hitch. That's sort of the idea here. So she settles on, I guess, testing on some more animals, and eventually, I guess, is going to test on other humans. Yeah, eventually it would be ready to unleash upon Agna Kella and then the rest of the world. That was the way forward. She would begin this very night. Very, very interesting. The only setup we have really for why she's doing this is, and I'm not even sure if they'll go super into this, but this is mentioned for a reason. Her little brother, when he'd wake from a nightmare, climb into her bed and fall back asleep nestled against her, which would never happen again. So her brother has died in some sort of a way, and this is why she wants revenge, theoretically against the North in particular, but also the world. Now, we'll get into the details on this, I guess, later on, but they do highlight that she has done years of studying poison craft. The stuff is a viscous metallic liquid that's colorless, tasteless, and odorless, which is sort of reminiscent of the poison that Ursa gives to Ozai, but I think that was mostly made from herbs and wasn't metallic in nature. But still, interesting stuff. Bit mad scientist-y kind of going on here with the poisoning that causes the disease. It's a really interesting concept for a villain. I'm sure there's something spiritual going on here, because they do highlight that the way that this poison works is that it does empower what is poisoned, and this is why whoever's poisoned kind of dies quite quickly. They don't necessarily die of a quote-unquote illness, but it also is like they are fully drained from kind of empowering themselves for those last moments. And that's why a normally somewhat calm animal like a turtle seal viciously attacked and killed someone earlier on, which doesn't tend to happen. It was stronger than one of these has ever been, type thing. So this is, I guess, going to set up the idea of potential bending empowerment, that like it has an effect on chi, so it might be spiritual in some way. And I think the setup might be that Maki took and her healing and potential spirit bending that we might get into probably is going to be somewhat of a counter to maybe the poison. We'll eventually get to that point, I think, is maybe the idea. Interestingly, as we go into the next one here, we get the idea of a bit of a past life moment of like Roku just has this kind of dream vision where he's following Karuk. Karuk slaps Roku and they kind of go hunting together to a certain degree, and we don't really find out what exactly happens. Gyatso wakes him up because there's an incident. A caribou bear has been poisoned and is attacking. It's going mad. It can't be stopped. One of the people gets injured, and it's a whole action sequence about Gyatso and Roku working together to try and take it out without like hurting it or killing it. Like, sure, Roku could probably just go crazy with firebending and take it out if he wanted to, but they don't want to do that. So they use airbending together to try and trap it in place. They do a bit of a combo move to effectively do a bit of waterbending, because Roku can't waterbend yet, but that doesn't work. They need more powerful waterbending to freeze it in place, which happens because this is the proper introduction of Makituk, who arrives, freezes the caribou bear in place. Shortly later, it is revealed that the caribou bear dies, not because of the ice, but because it's sort of like burned itself out effectively. What's the exact... yeah, it was the infection that killed it. That sort of idea. Yeah, Makituk also reveals she is a healer. She heals the guy who broke his arm in the attack. And then we basically just really set up the idea of like, hey, really notable water bender that could help us while we investigate what's going on here. Want to join us? And she's kind of like, okay, I've got nothing better to do. So it's a bit like, why not? And again, we haven't really been properly introduced to what the dynamic with Makituk is, but if you know the RPG stuff, we get a bit of a sense for what they might actually explore here. Now, obviously, Roku has just very quickly decided she's joining the team. We haven't really got like Gyatso's opinion on this necessarily, but we'll see what goes on here. She thinks there's the potential for a cure, but she's going to have to interact with the infected beings a bit more. So that's cool. That's great setup. That's actually a really nice place to, for the most part, end the preview. The team has been formed. How do they go about investigating? Now, interestingly, of course, the idea is like Atka must be there somewhere in the background. But like if all she's done is like gone up to an animal and kind of injected it or something like that, it might be a while before they figure out what's going on here, which is interesting. And then the start of chapter 8 is where my preview ends. And I think it's the furthest I've seen most people mention that like it continuously goes into the book. It's another scene from Sozin's perspective where Taiso has basically called a family meeting. No one else involved. It's Taiso, Lady Haze, Princess Zaysan, and Prince Sozin. They all arrive. This is going to be the big meeting, I guess, to address the future, maybe succession plans, at the very least address Taiso's health situation. We'll see what happens and what way this goes, but Sozin goes into this kind of a little bit worried about kind of what exactly is going to happen here. His heart begins to race, but also interestingly, the first dynamic here of like Taiso lets Zaysan away with a lot when he's actually very strict on Sozin. So she is the favored of the two. But I guess also Sozin is still... I don't know, like, are they going to do something like he makes Zaysan like the next in line to the throne and like really annoys Sozin? Is he going to do the thing of like trying to pit them against each other by making a big announcement that like, okay, I've chosen Zaysan, but maybe there's hope for you, Sozin, if you do something impressive or something like that. And that's the dynamic. I can see him trying to light a fire under Sozin here to just push him over the edge to become the ideal next leader or something like that. Very intrigued to read the rest of that chapter to see what exactly happens there. But as you can see, I'm going to wrap up the video basically there. So many interesting elements in play here. What Roku's mission actually is, the stuff going on within the royal family with Taiso and Sozin, Zaysan a little bit as well. The stuff with Ta Min, even though we only got like a little bit of a letter and one chapter, like we're going to get to see her kind of jump into action. And then the villain also seems incredibly intriguing. Plus they seem to be world building a little bit more of the Cold War era kind of stuff that the Roku is into the background of Northern Water Tribe issue with the Fire Nation, like conflict over islands, Earth Kingdom civil war feuding stuff potentially between Omashu and Ba Sing Se, depending on how that goes. We might maybe delve into the Night of Silent Sages, which I think probably has to have happened already. I think we basically know that, but what's the public perception of that, I suppose, is the idea. Still, I'm very, very intrigued by this book. I almost wasn't expecting it to have this much going on. And I'm actually now very, very hyped to get my hands on this book. And of course, I'll be doing full coverage of this, non-spoiler review, spoiler review, chapter analysis videos when it comes out. But it's nice to get the preview kind of stuff kind of done here and now. And it does feel like we're mostly just waiting for the actual release, because even if an outlet gets a official like exclusive preview, it kind of feels like, are we going to go deeper into the book than this? I think we're just going to get probably one of the chapters that they've already revealed here. Maybe if they do chapter 8, it could be really, really interesting, but I'd almost be a little bit surprised if they did that. So, exciting stuff. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on what we've seen from this book so far. How intrigued are you by the characters involved here? What plot point interests you the most? Do you think it's shaping up really well? But yeah, let me know what you think. And again, reminder that I also have the live stream if you want to kind of read through it in full in that way, not just an overview. But let me know what you think below. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.